Welcome to the Deep Dive. Especially for those of you deep into your UPSC prep, you know how vital it is to track global dynamics, international relations, economics. It's key stuff for mains, maybe even prelims.
Absolutely.
So today, we're zeroing in on something pretty significant. Chinese President Xi Jinping's recent trip to Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia. We're going to unpack the why behind this tour, what came out of it, and what it all means, especially with the whole U.S.-China trade situation humming in the background.
And we're drawing on some detailed analysis for this, specifically from the ASEAN Times. We've gone through it to pull out the core insights.
Great. So this tour wasn't just shaking hands, was it? The timing seems pointed.
It really does. As the source highlights, it happened right as the U.S. announced new tariff adjustments affecting these exact three countries, Vietnam, Malaysia, Cambodia.
Big players in global supply chains right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the timing strongly suggests China stepping in, saying, look, we offer stability, especially to a region feeling these economic shifts.
Okay, let's explore that idea more. China as the stable long-term partner. Our Asian Times really emphasizes this contrast with, let's say, perceived U.S. unpredictability.
That's definitely a core message. Beijing seems to be saying, amid the uncertainty, especially maybe from the U.S. side, we're reliable.
And how are they projecting that beyond just pointing fingers at U.S. tariffs? Is it just talk?
Well, it's more than talk, I think. While the U.S. often talks security alliances, China's stability offer seems grounded in consistent economic engagement. Think big infrastructure investment.
Like Belt and Road.
Precisely. Committing to huge projects like BRI signals a long-term economic game plan for the region, sort of irrespective of short-term trade spats started elsewhere. It's a different kind of reassurance.
Okay, let's drill down into the stops.
Yeah.
First up, Vietnam. The source notes Xi visited twice in less than 18 months. That's frequent.
Yeah, unusually frequent. It really signals how important Vietnam has become strategically for China.
And they signed a lot of deals.
They did. Almost 40 cooperation agreements. That's concrete.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the new railway project everyone talks about.
Right.
The analysis mentions things like the digital economy, renewable energy too. So it's a broad deepening of ties, not just about basic trade.
And Xi also promised better access for Vietnamese farm exports to China, even if the details are fuzzy.
Even with fuzzy details, the gesture itself is significant, don't you think?
Yeah, it feels like a diplomatic sweetener.
It does. Vietnam's always been in this delicate balancing act between China and the U.S. With global economics shifting, China's clearly trying to strengthen that partnership, pull Vietnam maybe closer into its economic orbit.
And China's already Vietnam's biggest trading partner, right?
It is. So this promise, if fulfilled, could mean even deeper integration. Huge potential there.
Okay, moving south to Malaysia. The big headlines seem to be Xi pushing for a China-ASEAN free trade deal. That sounds ambitious.
Hugely ambitious. And Malaysia, holding the ASEAN chair right now, is suddenly in a really pivotal position to help make that happen.
So this deal could potentially eliminate tariffs across a lot of Southeast Asia.
That's the potential, yes. Our Asian Times mentions the ASEAN Secretary General, Kao Kim Hourn, talking about exactly that, slashing tariffs region-wide. That would fundamentally reshape trade flows.
And Xi met with both the PM and the King in Malaysia.
He did. Meetings with Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim and King Sultan Ibrahim. It underscores just how serious China is about boosting trade and investment ties bilaterally with Malaysia, but also using Malaysia's ASEAN role.
Malaysia, like Vietnam, is also doing a bit of a balancing act, isn't it? Belt and Road partner China as top trading partner.
Definitely. Very similar positions strategically. They have strong economic ties with China. What was it? U.S. $206 billion in trade in 2024. Significant.
Though still less than China-Vietnam trade.
Right. Less than the $260 billion of Vietnam, showing the different degrees of economic linkage. But still, China's the top trading partner, top source of FDI for Malaysia.
So how does this proposed ASEAN free trade deal fit into that balance?
Well, it could potentially tilt the balance more towards Beijing, economically speaking. Lower tariffs, deeper integration into China's sphere. It's a compelling offer, but one Malaysia will weigh carefully against its other relationships, like with the U.S., which is a major export market.
Okay, final stop. Cambodia. The Asian Times called this one maybe the most symbolic, especially with those potential 49% U.S. tariffs hanging over them.
Yeah, the symbolism is potent there. Cambodia is facing a really direct economic threat from those potential U.S. tariffs. 49% is huge.
So Xi's visit is like throwing them an economic lifeline.
Sort of. It's a clear opportunity for Cambodia to double down on its already strong economic ties with China, almost as a counterweight. China was already Cambodia's top trading partner in 2024.
And trade's growing fast.
It soared 24% last year, over US $14 billion total, but it's heavily skewed.
How so?
Cambodia imports vastly more from China, about $12.15 billion, than it exports to China, which was only $1.6 billion. So there's a big dependence there already.
But the U.S. is still a major buyer of Cambodian goods.
Oh, absolutely. A key export destination. Exports to the U.S. were nearly $10 billion. So Cambodia wants to keep that U.S. market access while maybe leaning more on China for investment and imports, especially if those tariffs hit. Xi's visit helped solidify that China option.
Right. Now let's pull back to the bigger picture of this whole U.S.-China trade war context. The source describes pretty major tariff hikes from both sides.
Yeah, that's the essential backdrop for this whole tour. President Trump's quite aggressive tariff strategy, 245% on some Chinese goods, and China hitting back with 125% on U.S. goods. It creates a lot of uncertainty in the region.
And Trump talking about blanket tariffs, but giving most countries relief except China.
Exactly. That specific targeting of China, denying it the initial 90-day relief others got, probably helps China sell its narrative of being the more, predictable partner.
Plus, the leaders haven't spoken directly in a while.
Not since January, according to the source. And she's been quiet since the February tariff hikes. It just highlights the strain and the potential for more friction.
And this friction is already physically changing trade patterns in Southeast Asia. You mentioned supply chains earlier.
Precisely. The article points out how Chinese manufacturers started moving parts of their operations to places like Vietnam and Malaysia during Trump's first term, specifically to get around U.S. tariffs.
That's a direct consequence.
A very direct consequence. And it's reshaping the region. Look at Vietnam becoming this major manufacturing hub, China becoming its #2 investor early this year.
And the trade numbers reflect that.
They do. China-Vietnam trade hitting U.S. $260 billion, China-Malaysia at U.S. $206 billion in 2024. Huge numbers.
Even while the U.S. remains a critical export market for them.
Right. The U.S. is still the main destination for Vietnamese exports, $109.4 billion, and Malaysian exports, $54.9 billion. But China's growing trade and investment presence is undeniable, and it's partly a strategic reaction to the trade war.
So wrapping this up, what are the wider implications? What's the takeaway from this tour and the trade tensions?
Well, from Beijing's viewpoint, it's clearly about locking in its influence in Southeast Asia, cementing itself as the go-to economic partner. Xi's tour was a very visible push to project stability and reliability, contrasting with U.S. trade actions.
But there's a counterpoint, too.
There is. Our Asian Times notes analysts warning about a potential China vacuum, that as supply chains shift out of China due to costs or geopolitics, other countries, like India perhaps, are eager to grab that investment and manufacturing.
So it's not just about tariffs versus diplomacy.
Not at all. It's fundamentally about influence, perception, long-term alignment in a really vital region. While Trump used tariffs as a primary tool, Xi's using diplomacy, investment, trade deals, actively trying to build regional consensus around China's vision.
And the trade war is accelerating all this.
Definitely. The escalating tariffs and scrambling supply chains are forcing a quiet but significant realignment. It's much bigger than just a U.S.-China clash.
Okay, so to summarize for everyone, especially our UPSC listeners, Xi Jinping's tour through Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia wasn't just symbolic. It was a strategic move to bolster China's standing in Southeast Asia, particularly as the U.S.-China trade war creates uncertainty.
Right. Offering stability, economic cooperation,
Right.
That was the message.
And each stop had a specific focus.
Yeah.
Supply chains with Vietnam, pushing that big ASEAN trade deal via Malaysia, and reinforcing economic ties with Cambodia under the shadow of potential U.S. tariffs.
Exactly. All happening against this backdrop of trade tensions that are actively reshaping global supply chains and regional economies.
Which is precisely the kind of dynamic you need to understand for your exams.
Absolutely. For anyone deep in UPSC prep, getting your head around these evolving geopolitical and economic currents is crucial. This deep dive really touches on core themes relevant for mains, maybe even prelims. Think about the long-term shifts in regional power and, importantly, what it means for India's own strategy and opportunities in Southeast Asia.
That leads perfectly into a final thought for you all to mull over. With these shifting trade patterns and talk of a potential China vacuum, what role do you think India can realistically play, or should play, in Southeast Asia's evolving economic and political map? Something to consider.
Definitely food for thought.
If you found this analysis useful for your studies, please do hit like and subscribe for more deep dives relevant to the UPSC syllabus. And importantly, leave your comments below. Questions, further queries, we want to hear them. Your engagement really helps. And just to reiterate, our discussion today was grounded in the analysis published by the Our Asian Times. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.